Junkerqueen has the lowest pick rate out of any hero in Overwatch, at least according to Overbuff within the last month. But why is this? Is Queen that bad, and does anything need to be done about this? Well, firstly, it's worth mentioning that at least part of this is coming from how low tank pick rate is, generally speaking. Aaron Keller actually brought this up recently in his blog post about 5v5 and 6v6, showing the tank queue times being sliced by over half when going 5v5. And even then, on average, the role still has longer queue times compared to damage and supports. Even on Overbuff, you can still see low tank pick rates at just over 18% within the last month, and it actually drops if you go to competitive game modes only, and even at Grandmaster, the pick rate is still below 18%. I will say, if you filter by competitive, Winston and Cassidy are still lower than Junkerqueen, but she's still the lowest tank at the Grandmaster level, and overall, she's still the lowest. So I think factors outside of Queen's control, particularly her being a tank, already puts her at a disadvantage. But that doesn't explain why, compared to other tanks, her pick rate is still the lowest out of all of them, barring Winston at lower levels of play. And I think there's two reasons for this. The first is skill floor. The skill floor of Queen is actually shockingly high. Again, we need to shift perspectives to someone who might be a bit newer to the game. You have your knife, which requires a good amount of mechanical skill to use, you have an axe swing which has a long cast time and is punishing if you miss it, your primary fire isn't the easiest thing to aim with, and while you do have commanding shout as a free sustain tool, if you compare it to something like Ariza's Fortify, Ram's Block, Sigma's Grasp, Diva's Matrix, or just Ryan's big ass shield, it doesn't look like much in comparison. Your passive on Queen, which is a large part to your sustain, you also can't directly see. You don't actually know how much impact it's having, which can lead to the hero feeling a little bit underwhelming, especially when you're not consistently hitting knives. For comparison, if we take another tank like Mauga, his skill floor is very, very low. You literally just press W, hold both your miniguns at their tank, press your overdrive when you're low, and you're gonna get a lot of value at lower level play. You also have a stomp which, even though it feels clunky, it also feels powerful and impactful. You low-key feel like that Sisyphus boulder meme when it keeps rolling down the hill. But skill floor just isn't the full story. If you add the Grandmaster filter to Overbuff, Queen's pick rate is still insanely low and is now the lowest in the tank category. And skill floor has nothing to do with pick rate at higher level play, so what does? Well, it's value ceiling. In other words, what is the maximum potential value of a hero if you play it to perfection, or at least close to perfection? And especially with the recent Queen buffs too, you'd think it'd be relatively high, which it is, but there's a bias here that we need to account for. Say that for one hero, Hero A gets a value 90 out of 100. Say another hero, Hero B, gets a value of 89 out of 100. Now you would conclude that both these heroes are very good, but if I had to tell you which hero to pick and play, you would choose Hero A because they are better. It doesn't matter how much better they are than Hero B, it just matters that they're better, even by the smallest of margins. And that is what I think is the issue with Queen, at least right now. Queen is not a bad hero. This isn't like playing Sojourn after the railgun nerf, or Ariza after she got giga nerfed a few months ago, or even Cassidy after the range change. It's just that pick rate isn't in a vacuum, and when you compare Queen to other heroes, which we'll talk about, it's hard to justify picking her unless your team has a Queen specialist. So what are the other tanks that give Queen some trouble, and more importantly, in what situations can Queen get optimal value? Well, one of the main tanks giving competition to Queen is of course Diva. Karku talked about it in his tier list, and even in Pro League, she is joint most banned, and when she doesn't get banned, she gets a shit ton of playtime. Of course, this is due to the massive tank buff patch a few weeks back, where Diva's matrix duration got increased, her micro missile damage increased, and paired alongside that armor reduction change, Diva got a massive sustain buff while also gaining significantly more damage. Now Queen did get some respectable buffs, but especially considering she doesn't benefit from the armor change at all, and that she hasn't got a good matchup into Diva, it's no wonder that she's getting barely any playtime. Diva's armor halves the damage that Queen can do, Diva can eat Queen knives, and because of her boosters, Diva is way more viable in vertical maps and can also avoid carnage while mitigating the effects of Rampage. However, the map can help swing the matchup back into Queen's favour. On maps where Queen is able to close the distance and outbrawl that Diva, that's where she can start getting a lot more value, and in fact, that's exactly what we saw happen yesterday with Crazy Raccoons playing against Gaming Gladiators, where both teams played Queen and Control Center, and actually, on Gardens, both teams played Diva, because the map is so much more open. Let's actually analyze the tank picks between the first two teams here, because I think it shows off some of Queen's strengths. Firstly, Gladiators are running out on Orisa, but I assume that's because they thought Raccoons was gonna play Mauga. Queen into Mauga is a pretty good matchup, as Commander X explained on stream, because both Queen and Mauga have invisible aura abilities that help teammates, but because of Queen's hitbox, it's a lot easier for Queen to hit the Mauga than for Mauga to hit the Queen. In terms of Queen into Orisa, it's yet again another favourable matchup for Queen, only because Orisa has been nerfed into the ground. Her cooldown cycles are just way too long, even with the two recent buffs. Of course, the elephant in the room here is hero bans. Obviously, looking at Raccoons, you can see that they banned Ram. Would Gladiators play Ram here if he wasn't banned? Probably not, actually. At least on this map. Queen has an individually better matchup than Ram, but more importantly, the added versatility that a Ram brings with his shield and his range just isn't needed as much on a map like Control Center. In another match on Lijiang between Falcus and Twisted, where Ram wasn't banned, neither team opted to play him. Admittedly, BAP was also banned too, which could certainly have an effect, but there's a reason why Queen isn't played on other maps really. We haven't even talked about Sigma, who's got a great matchup into Queen. He can punish her rotations with his range, rock her up close, and force a shout easily, and Queen has no shield to help her team rotate, likewise to Orisa and Mauga. The reason why Sigma isn't being played against Queen or Control Center is because the sightlines are so short that rotations for Queen without a shield are actually very doable. For comparison, if you look at a map like Midtown or Circuit Royale, where the sightlines are much longer, it's so much easier for teams to get a pick off during those big ass rotations where Queen doesn't provide a shield. Before ending this video off, let's take a look at why Queen is being played, where admittedly, she rarely is. First fight here, and the main win con of Raccoon is to get their Genji, Venture and Queen on top of the backline of Gladiators, who are running a more ranged comp, looking to disrupt and prevent that dive by Gladiators. If they manage to do that, they should win the fight. Of course, that doesn't happen. Max gets a really nice knife onto Naga, getting him pretty low, which is something that no other tank can really do. This provides enough of a distraction for Lip to flank around to the right to go for what's likely a hard engage. Because the Cassidy doesn't have an escape route, it's a pretty easy dive for the side of Raccoons. It's interesting to note here that if Sojourn was being played, she can just slide away to the coast side Mega and absorb that dive a lot better. But unfortunately, Cassidy obviously doesn't have that luxury. However, Gladiators can't just play Sojourn because she is horrific right now, so it puts Gladiator in a hard position that they can't solve easily. They attempt to solve it the fight after by mirroring the comp just with a Kiriko instead of a Baptiste, but here you're going to see one of Queen's biggest downsides being the inability to rotate safely due to the lack of a shield. When Tread tries to rotate through the choke here, because they're walking into the space of Raccoons who are already set up with multiple angles, Tread just eats a billion damage and is forced to shout early. This just means that all Raccoons need to do is back up and re-push with their own shout, which is exactly what they do. They even toss in the beat too and secure the fight win. The last fight here is very long and messy, but in short, Gladiators face the same issue that they did last fight, having to use both support ults very early because of how low they got from Lip's Excavate, and from there on, it's just the trading game. Gary Stevenson reference for those who know. In conclusion, I actually think Queen is pretty strong right now, but there's just very few circumstances where she's the best option. On vertical maps, you play Diva, and on horizontal maps, you either play Sigma or Ramatra, unless the sightlines are super short and it's easy to rotate. As for the casuals, Queen has one of the highest skill floors in the tank category, and considering she doesn't get immediate value compared to someone like a Reinhardt, Ramatra or Mauga, it's starting to make sense as to why she's picked so infrequently by both the casual and rank players. Anyways, that's it for the video. As always, let me know your thoughts down below, and until next time.